Okay, we'd like to welcome everyone to the September 16th, 2022 meeting of the CTC Road Charge Technical Advisory Committee. Thank you again for participating in our committee meetings, and welcome to all of you. This will be the last meeting of the year for 2022. A little bit of a break here. Staff has a lot of work to do, but I hope all of us have had a productive year, and I look forward to another successful and busy year next year. And I want to thank everyone for their hard work and their contributions to this advisory committee. Before we begin, Doug will brief everyone on the format for today's meeting and the process of public comment. So Doug, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you, Chair Liu. The California Road Charge Technical Advisory Committee was established in 2014 by Senate Bill 1077 to study alternatives to the gas tax, gather public comment, and make recommendations to CalSTA regarding the design of a road charge pilot program. Our meetings normally take place in diverse locations around the state so that members can gather feedback firsthand from stakeholders and members of the public around California. However, containment measures surrounding COVID-19 have required us to adjust to a webinar format. Please bear with us should we encounter any technical challenges. The committee's agenda can be found in the Handouts tab you see in the control panel of the webinar, or also on our website, www.catc.ca.gov. Live closed captioning and American Sign Language translations can be provided if you ask in advance for the next meeting. Should you have any questions or comments during this meeting, please let us know by raising your hand, or otherwise for the members, get our attention on camera and wait for the chair to call on you. You can also send inquiries and comments through the questions tab that can be read to presenters on behalf and the audience on your behalf. Please mute your microphone when you except when you intend to speak, to minimize outside noise and feedback. The chair will do his best to call on each of you in turn. We hope that you will turn your camera on while speaking if you have one. Because this meeting is not an in-person meeting, every vote will need to be a roll call vote. If you're on the agenda to make a presentation, please do your best to be succinct. Please remember to speak at a steady pace to allow our translating services adequate time for translation. For the members of the public, we welcome comments from the public as part of each item at this meeting. We encourage you to use the raise hand feature as early into the item as you can to give the system time to acknowledge you. You should see the webinar control panel, likely located on the right-hand side of your screen. There you will find the raise hand icon and the questions tab. Please click on the hand icon to indicate you wish to make a comment. You will then be unmuted and called upon to make your comment. Please be sure to state your name and affiliation prior to voicing your remarks. Alternately, you may use the questions tab. Type in the agenda item number you are commenting on and your comment. Commission staff will read the comment on your behalf. Please do your best to be concise with your comments. Also, please make sure that your comments add new information. If you agree with the comments of a previous speaker, simply make that statement. Since we often have many speakers, we ask that you make your point in 3 minutes or less. If, for some reason, we have many speakers on a topic, we reserve the right to limit comments to 1 minute if needed. You will not be able to be on camera while making comments. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link and phone number to access the webinar. These should not be shared with other participants, as this can create confusion for staff when making comments. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate that. Assuming there are no public comments on that agenda item, we will move on to agenda item number 2, which is the roll call. So Doug, please call the roll.
Asha Agrawal.
Sorry, yes.
Thank you. Lisa Bartlett.
Here.
Terry Benzel.
Here.
Vice Chair Finnegan. Assemblymember Friedman. Lauren Kay. Jim Medaffer. Senator Newman. Pam O'Connor,
Here.
Robert Poitras, Eric Sauer,
Present.
Stacy Atkins Salazar,
I'm here.
Axel Santana,
Here.
Li Tien, Chair Liu.
Here.
Chair, we do have a quorum.
That is wonderful. So we don't have to move the agenda around. Way to go, folks. Okay, the next item actually is an update from our executive director. So I will turn it over to Mitch.
Good morning, everybody. Just turning on my camera. As you all know, we continue to move forward towards a road charge program in California. Our team was recently able to complete an estimate of the impact of the California Air Resources Board's Advanced Clean Cars rule on fuel tax revenues, and it shows we'll have a significant revenue loss if we do not transition to a road charge. The revenue collection pilot will work out some of the logistics needed to put the state in a good position to begin to implement a road charge and collect this fee. The pilot design recommendations you'll see today represent work staff has completed over the last year. What you're seeing is a summarized version of our recommendations, but we have a lot of background work behind these recommendations. There are a few things in this work I'd like to highlight. First off, staff put together a number of reference documents and templates that could be used in the pilot, including research on commercial account managers, payment methods, and accounting processes, and templates for calculating rates and reimbursements and for monitoring commercial account manager performance. Staff estimated the number of participants that would be needed to achieve a statistically significant sample size in each participant category. Staff researched a number of past documents, not the least of which was our 2017 design recommendations and final report, and also the 4 phases demonstration final report, the 2021 Caltrans data security audit, and pilot documents from Oregon and Washington. Staff worked with the State Controller's Office and the Department of Tax and Fee Administration to put together an option of a revenue collection process. Staff is working with commercial vehicles so that they can be included in the pilot. And staff is putting together a map of vehicle ownership by zip code. Overall, the recommendations that we have on the agenda represent a good body of work that builds on the past efforts of this committee and others and helps establish a good framework for the SB 339 pilot. We really appreciate your continued input in this process and look forward to presenting these recommendations to you. I really want to thank Hannah and her team for this work, particularly Tam Tran, who has been assisting us for only a short time, and they have really vastly exceeded my expectations of how much we would be able to get done by now. So I just really want to thank them for their efforts. That concludes my report.
Okay, thank you, Mitch. Assuming we don't have any public comments on Mitch's report, we can move on to agenda item number 4, which is consideration and approval of the minutes from the July 22nd meeting, which I apologize for missing. I was hard at work on vacation in Hawaii. So why don't we take a look at the minutes, but before we do, I think Hannah was going to review our action items and provide an update on the action items from that meeting.
Sure, thanks, Commissioner Liu. Here are the action items from the last meeting. So Dr. Agrawal sent her research findings about equity impacts around to the TAC. Vice Chair Finnegan informed us that the event, the Clean Vehicle Policy Summit and Car Show, will be held on Friday, September 9th. So it actually already passed, but he sent an email around about that, or we forwarded it for him in LA. And to follow up on a request from last meeting, Caltrans doesn't really have any information to share right now about whether a road charge will be considered a tax or a fee. So we'll stay tuned for any additional guidance on that in the future. And that concludes the action items from the last meeting.
Okay, great. Do we have any comments from members of the committee? Any comments from members of the public? I will entertain a motion. We can get one.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, moved by Terry, and I think Professor Agrawal seconded. And Doug, will you please read the roll?
Asha Agrawal,
Approve.
Lisa Bartlett,
Should I abstain since I was not present at the meeting? But if we have all of the abstentions for people absent, I don't know if we'll have enough votes to get it passed.
it's not required that you abstain. You're certainly welcome to.
Okay, well then I'll go ahead and approve then. Thank you.
Thank you. Terry Benzel,
I approve.
Vice Chair Finnegan, Assemblymember Friedman, Lauren Kay, Jim Madaffer, Senator Newman, Sam O'Connor,
Yes.
Robert Poitras. I did see he had joined. I'm not sure where he went, but he was on briefly. Eric Sauer,
I approve.
Stacy Atkins Salazar,
Yes.
Axel Santana,
I approve.
Li Tien, Chair Liu.
I'm in the same boat as Supervisor Bartlett. Do you need my vote in order to pass this, or could I abstain and continue to have this get through?
You can't abstain. It's a simple majority for a vote on this.
Okay, I'm going to abstain because I did miss the meeting.
Okay, so the item is approved.
Thank you, Doug. You know, the minutes are not normally that dramatic, but we did get it to be a little more exciting this time around. That brings us to agenda item number 5, which is member reports. And it's wonderful to have an opportunity to get updates from our members at each of these meetings. So does anyone have something to share with us? I guess, Professor Agrawal, we're going to hear from you, but if you have other updates on other than what you're going to be speaking about in a minute or two, please jump in.
Just very briefly, last time I mentioned a sort of companion project that looks more generally at how we might structure rates. And I think my slides were sent around last time. Actually, Lauren Kay sent back some comments, which was really useful and helpful. And if anybody is interested in talking to me about them or would like me to resend it, I'm happy to do that.
Certainly a timely subject that I know our staff is paying close attention to, thanks to the legislative efforts of our Assembly and Senate. Anyone else have any updates for us?
Commissioner Liu, I just wanted to mention something I forgot to say before. I just wanted to acknowledge that Farrah Brock is on for Assemblymember Friedman. And so we're gonna make sure that she can make comments if she wants to. And we thank you for participating in this call, Farrah.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you moved her over to the panel?
We can't do that right now, but she should still be able to comment.
All right, Sarah, so if you're interested in commenting, just raise your hand and we can turn your...
She has the ability to unmute herself as needed as of now.
Okay, wonderful. Anyone else? All right, Doug, any comments from members of the public on this item?
No comments as of now.
Okay, well then that does bring us to agenda item number 6, which is on equity research. It's an information item, and Professor Agrawal from San Jose State University will give us an update on her research on equity and road user charge. This is different from the rate research that she's doing, and she has her hands in lots of research projects, but we have the benefit now of getting these updates at our meetings. So I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. By the way, this report, I actually literally last night, it got published. So the full results are up on MTI's website if anybody wants to learn more. Also, I am happy if people want to ask questions along the way, if that meets sort of with staff's approval, but we can certainly save questions till the end too, if you think that's better. So let me jump in, next slide. So this is work that is funded by MTI, and I have been collaborating with 3 folks at UCLA, Sam Speroni, Brian Taylor, and Michael Manville. Next slide. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is just super quick sort of what we did, our methods, and then what we learned in terms of comparing the cost of fuel taxes versus a sort of equivalent RUC, breaking it down by rural versus urban residents, and also looking at different sort of household income categories. So for each of these sort of groupings, we compare the fuel efficiency of their vehicles, the mileage, weekly mileage that the household as a whole drives, again, at a household level, excuse me, fuel consumption. And then we kind of use all those inputs and we can estimate what households are spending weekly on a state fuel tax and what they might spend if we switched to a particular kind of RUC and we looked at a flat rate version. And then I'll just wrap up with some few what I think might be interesting policy implications. Next slide. So what did we do? There is a federally run national household travel survey that gets done, I don't know, every 6-8 years or so. The most recent of these was data collected in 2017, and Caltrans or CalSTA partnered with Federal Highways to add on additional California respondents. So we actually had many thousands of people across the state. I think it was about 26,000 households that we had data for. So it allowed us to actually compare, different rural versus urban and such. So what we did, the household is our unit of analysis because we figure that from a budgeting perspective, that's what really matters. It's not the individual vehicle or the driver, it's household, assuming there's a common budget. So we looked at all households that owned at least one gas or diesel vehicle. If you had an EV, if you only had EVs, you were just dropped. If you were a household that, say, had one EV and one gas vehicle, then you were included. We calculated the average household fuel efficiency for all gas and diesel vehicles in the household. So if you had one vehicle that gets 40 miles to a gallon and one vehicle that gets 20 miles to a gallon, we would estimate your average household fuel efficiency as 30 miles to a gallon. We classified households, and this was very kind of crude, but as rural or urban, defined as whether or not you're inside something the census called a metropolitan statistical area. So urban can include, pretty low density areas that are kind of surrounding metro areas. And then finally, we estimated what mileage fee would California need to charge to collect the same amount of revenue that collectively these households are paying in gas and diesel taxes. And then we added on a 6%, and this was just a rough estimate, but that it might cost 6% more to collect a RUC than the fuel taxes. And so when we did that math, we came to 2.52 cents per mile. I did not collaborate with the CTC staff on this, and I remember last meeting they presented their estimate, which is actually pretty similar. I don't remember the exact numbers, but good to know that we're both in the same ballpark in our estimates. Next slide. So I'm going to jump in now to what we found. So you're going to be seeing a number of graphs, and in all of them, the yellow gold colored bars are our rural residents, and the blue ones are urban residents. And then you'll see these are different household income categories. So if we look at this household average fuel efficiency, we find that there's actually a modest difference overall by income. So the highest income households own vehicles that are 8% more efficient than the lowest income households. And it's a difference of less than 2 miles per gallon. Again, this is the average. So one thing I really want to emphasize, everything I'm presenting is averages. So of course, individual households will have, very different pictures. In some cases, you might have a much more extreme difference between a particular low income and a particular higher income household. Comparing urban versus rural, the urban vehicles are, again, I would say more efficient, but not enormously so. So 12% more efficient than on average than rural vehicles. And it's a difference of about 2.5 miles per gallon. And as you'll see, if you look at the figure, if we sort of look at, overall income, there's not honestly a huge difference as we go from our lowest income households at the top to the bottom. So let's go to the next slide. So the next thing we did was we tried to think, well, how much is everybody driving? And we did the same analysis, rural versus urban, and we looked at the different income groups. So here we found a little bit more difference than on fuel efficiency. So rural households are driving 18% more miles than urban households on average. And that's 503 versus 427 miles. And again, this is all vehicles in the household combined. There's a much more dramatic difference if we look at income. So the highest income households as a group are driving 61% more miles per week than the lowest income households. And by the way, that's pretty typical. I don't think there's anything surprising. It is well known that people with a lot more money tend to drive more. Next slide. So we then were able to use how many miles you're driving, what your average fuel efficiency of your vehicles is, and estimate how much are you actually paying every week in state fuel taxes. And here we found there's definitely like a clear trend. Actually, we can just start with the figure here. And it's pretty obviously, as you are a more affluent household, you are paying more in fuel taxes. And also, if you just stare at the graph, you'll see that the gold bars are longer than the blue bars pretty much throughout. So if you are a rural household, you are paying more per week in fuel taxes. And then just some notes, I put it on the side. So the highest income households are paying 7% more than the lowest income households. Now, as a percent term, 57%, it seems like, oh my goodness, this is a huge amount. However, if you look at the dollar cost, it's a difference of about $4.50 per week. So it's a little bit less significant if you think about it that way, although of course this is weekly, and so we would multiply by 52 for annual costs. Now, if we compare the rural and urban households, here we see, a very noticeable difference, although not quite as much as a difference as there is by income. So the rural households are paying 32% more on average than the urban households in weekly state fuel tax costs. And then finally, the difference between rural and urban costs definitely increases as you get to the higher income levels. So for our very lowest income folks, those are households earning less than $24,999 a week. There's a small difference, although it's not actually statistically significant even. That's what those little black bars, if you can see them, are showing. But by the time we get up to the 200K plus households, there's a very clear distinction. If you have more affluent, you're driving much more in a rural household than an urban one. Next slide. So then this is where we estimated for those same households, well, what if the state, instead of the state fuel tax, charged this road user charge, which, as I mentioned, we estimated at about 2.5 cents per mile. So we found that rural households will pay 18% more on average than urban households, and it's a difference of less than $2 a week. And then if we look at income, the highest income households are going to pay about third more than the lowest income households. And in this case, the dollar value is a bit bigger. It's a difference of about $5 a week. And again, if you look at the figure, you see the same general pattern of kind of, as regardless of whether you're urban or rural, the more affluent your household, the more you're driving. And again, that for the very lowest income households, there's not too much of a difference by rural versus urban. Next slide. So here we've kind of put everything together, and don't worry about all the details. I actually, on the next slide, I'm going to show you something that I think kind of sums up the key points here. But now we're looking at, well, what happened comparing for all our different groups if you have the fuel tax or the road user charge. And so the yellow bars are, the sort of lighter color fuel tax. The darker gold one is the RUCs, your rural. And then the lighter blue is the urban fuel tax, and the darker blue is the urban RUC. And so you can see, well, actually, I can't see out the back window. I'm sorry?
I think that was unintentional.
Okay. So one thing I will mention, just as an overall pattern, the switch would lower the costs for rural households and raise them for urban households. And then the other thing is the actual dollar cost change, switching from one to another, from the fuel tax to the RUC, would be less than $1 a week for any of the household groups we looked at, urban, rural, whatever their income level. So the next slide, which is where I'm going to kind of wrap up my data I'm sharing, this is just showing you, what is the change in the weekly dollar costs that a household would be paying if we moved from the fuel tax to the RUC, this 2.5 cents per mile flat rate RUC. And the gray, these are households that would see their costs decrease, and the reddish color is the households that would see an increase. And so it's pretty clear. The first column is the rural households. It's gray for everybody except the 150 to 200K annual household income groups. Their costs would rise 73 cents a week, but everybody else's would drop. The next column, the urban, it's all red. Everybody's costs, weekly costs would go up. And then we also calculated this statewide. And again, on average, by income group, everybody's costs would go up, which makes sense because we did estimate this 6% kind of collection cost as part of the RUC. The other thing I will mention is that California has vastly more urban households than rural households. So in all cases, the urban, if you're looking at statewide averages, it's very much dominated by whatever the case is for the urban households. Next slide. Oops, actually, oh, that didn't show up very well on your version of PowerPoint. So this was just looking at how the cost would change, not by income, not by urban versus rural, but by how fuel efficient your vehicles are on average in the household. And the basic lesson is that if you have an average household vehicle fuel efficiency of 21 miles per gallon or more, your costs will go up. So the more fuel efficient vehicles, and then if you're below that 21 miles per gallon average, your costs will go down. So that 21 miles per hour average is kind of the breaking point, depending on whether your costs will go up or down with the switch to a RUC. Next slide. Okay, so just as a summary, if we look at fuel efficiency, so the first column is variations by your income group. The second is variations by where you live, urban v rural, and sort of our key thing. So fuel efficiency, urban households own vehicles that are 12% more average, fuel efficient on average than rural households. Rural households also drive 18% more miles weekly, and they pay about $3 more per week on average in fuel taxes. And if we were to shift to a RUC, oh, I'm sorry, these this table has things swapped. I thought I had fixed this, but I had not. So let me, they're not all in the right columns. So geography, urban households are 12% more fuel efficient. They drive 18% more miles. They pay $3 more per week in fuel tax. And the shift to a RUC would lower costs for almost all rural households and raise them for all urban households. And then by looking by income, the highest income households own vehicles that are 8% more efficient than the lowest income. So difference, but modest. The highest income households also drive 61% more miles per week. They pay about $4.50 per week more in fuel tax. And if we switched from the fuel tax to a RUC, it would raise costs more for the wealthiest households than for the lower income households. And next slide. So these are just three things that sort of we as the research team thought were potential policy concerns if we made the switch. And again, I want to emphasize that this is only if we use this flat rate RUC where everybody's paying the 2.52 cents per mile. Although actually it's less about the cost, it's more about the fact that it is a flat rate RUC. So one thing is that such a shift would basically transfer costs from the people with the fuel efficient vehicles over to the people with the less efficient vehicles, which does run counter to climate policy in the sense that we're trying to encourage people not just to go electric now, but also if you are going to have a gas or diesel vehicle, to buy a more fuel efficient one. And so we sort of lose that little price incentive. And some people might feel like at some level this is unfair, others of course not. However, this could be easily addressed by structuring the road user charge rate so that it somehow is connected with fuel efficiency, i.e. a slightly lower rate if you're a gas sipping Prius or whatever, and a higher rate if you're a Hummer guzzling a lot of gas. You also, and I know this is not what the state sort of officials and staff are talking about, but we could keep the fuel tax and add a small road user charge. And that would again preserve the kind of price benefit for the more fuel efficient vehicles. A second possible concern is that this particular RUC that we looked at would increase costs for the very poorest urban households. And from an equity perspective, these are the households that can least absorb cost increases. But again, there are lots of ways we could address that. One is simply to charge a different rate, like a discounted rate for people who have sort of documented income below some threshold, like we do with utility pricing and lifeline rates. And then another idea, which comes from utility pricing, some places they do what they call block rate pricing. So your first sort of, let's say 5,000 miles you drove in a year, you might pay a very, very small road user charge. So everybody gets this kind of basic mobility at very low cost. But then additional miles that you drove in the year, your household drove, would be charged at that higher rate. Or this would probably have to be by vehicle, not by household. So that's another way, again, because the people who are driving the most on average are the most affluent households. So, and then finally, this is not news to any of us, but at least given current technology, et cetera, raising our revenue through a RUC versus a fuel tax will increase, collection costs. And it might well quickly go down below that 6%. This again was a kind of hand-wavy estimate, but it will be something. And so why, what might justify that, especially in the short run where we don't yet have, many millions of EVs running around paying nothing. And we would think that one reason that it might be worth imposing this extra cost is if the RUC would somehow, allow us more efficiently than fuel tax to achieve state objectives, whether that's encouraging fuel efficient vehicles or reducing the cost burden on low income households. So that is where I will wrap up. The next slide I think you can go to, but it's just, the publication is up. I can send that out. And actually, Hannah, if you don't mind, I will send you a new version of these slides that's in a PDF so the formatting problems don't show up. And I can also just pop in the URL to the published report.
Sure. Thanks, Sasha.
Okay, so we have some time for comments and discussion. If anyone has anything they would like to ask or any comment they would like to make, any members of the committee?
This is Stacy. Sorry, I don't have video, but I don't have any questions, but I just wanted to thank Asha for the work on this. Much appreciated.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we can all agree. This is just the type of questions that need to be answered. And you've done a really great job of putting some parameters on it and putting it in context. You know, I would really hope that even the people who worry most about tax increases are not going to get really upset over, you know, the cost of a cup of coffee a week or so difference. Anyway, Supervisor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chairman Liu. Asha, great presentation and such good information. I think the sooner we can go statewide to a road usage charge, the better. I sit on 2 transportation commissions right now, toll roads and then the Orange County Transportation Authority. And I can tell you, with Caltrans in the state, every new roadway infrastructure project has a component in it of HOV. So we're charging toll fees or fees to utilize because the state of California is so far behind in road maintenance statewide. And every single month they're getting less revenue, both at the state and federal level, to maintain our roadway systems throughout the state and the country. So the sooner we can switch over, the better. And then obviously it's more equitable because more of my friends are getting the all electric vehicles or all natural gas vehicles, you know, and they're happy because they're paying 0 tax. And I said, that's not fair. You're driving 52,000 miles a year and you're essentially paying nothing except a small fee at the DMV to register your vehicle. And, you know, you've got other people that are having to fill up at the pump consistently and pay that tax. But it's a declining revenue source. So I'm excited to see this really move forward on a revenue neutral basis. And I think the quicker we can do it as a state, you know, we're all going to be in a much better position to fund and support our projects for roadway usage and construction and so on for the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor. Terry, you had a question or comment?
Yeah, I mean, of course, thank you very much for this work. I'd love to see the pointer to the publication, getting it published, tremendously important right now. I guess sort of 2 follow-ons, given such great data, you know, I you know, concur with others that trying to move very quickly in this area because of this data that we have is just absolutely essential, you know, and I'd love to talk with others about, you know, how we do a public information campaign on this topic. Of course, I understood your final remark about, well, what if you kept the gas tax and added on just this, you know, as a way of making it more equitable and environmentally appropriate. But of course, politically, that would not be the right thing to do. So I think politically moving away from gas tax would have such a huge implication. And then being able to demonstrate that that move is not severely, you know, cost prohibitive to the rest of the community. So very, very exciting. After all the years of work that we've been doing here, this is very exciting. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think this would have been nice if it had been published before Mobility 21, because there was a panel on road user charge that discussed all these issues. And certainly the federal gas tax doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon. So we will still be paying gas taxes in one way, shape, or form, even if, especially if California gets out ahead of the rest of the country on this. Any other members?
Could I say one more thing? Yesterday morning, NPR did a really good story where they broke down what is the cost of gas I mean, they were getting at the, why are oil companies making a lot of money, after the Ukraine war and all of that. But independent of that, it was very, very informative because it took every penny and it went, so now we're at $2, now we're at $3, now we're at $4. It got to a cost of a gallon of gas before it even then put on the taxes. So, it's something others here, we may want to go pull whoever did that report for NPR and take a look at that and add it to our portfolio because it was very interesting.
Yeah, there's two things. Actually, I think Hannah and Doug, if we can send out the link to Professor Agrawal's research and then the story that Terry mentioned, that would be helpful for everyone. Any other members? Yes, Supervisor Bartlett.
So a couple more things. When you mentioned that California will probably be leading the way and we won't have that federal interoperability for a period of time, we can't put a geofence around the state of California. So how can we best accommodate, and I know Eric will ask the question about goods movement in the trucking industry, tourism with people crossing, county lines and state lines and, traveling on business and that sort of thing. So how do we accommodate all of those kinds of things? And I know the administrative fee at 6%, and it makes sense. Filling up at the pump, the admin fee is less than 1%, but it's very simplistic. So going to a different methodology for calculating the fees and collecting the data, there's going to be a higher cost. But to the extent that we can't put a device or use our smartphones in every vehicle, what are some of the methodologies that you think we can implement that will actually help reduce that admin cost? And then cover the interoperability with regard to California versus federal, and how do we calculate and all of the road usage miles for people that are coming across state lines.
And that's not something I specifically have looked in, but you're right, Lisa, these are critical. I don't know if staff want to point us to resources that they have available, or is this something that ideally, if staff time permits, maybe there's sort of an updated review of the cost of implementing these systems. And I know it varies enormously. Hawaii wants to do an annual check of your odometer as part of a vehicle inspection they're doing anyway. So the cost is almost zero versus something that's in real time.
Right, and then we have talked about
because we're on an island, so
different collection mechanisms for different circumstances, right? So especially if you're spending a lot of time driving on, not on state roads, on private roads, or Indian reservations out of the state, then it might be best in that circumstance that you actually have a geo tracker of some sort, and you allow the collection of that data, incorporating whatever privacy mechanisms we can to maximize that and protect privacy. But then you get charged for those miles you put on public roads. And then for some other people, you might want to just pay month to month by taking a picture of your odometer or something like that. Or other people may just want to have it as part of their registration fee. And, I think of that as the Jay Leno scenario, where he has so many vehicles, he's not going to go around, paying someone to read his odometers every month. He's going to pay a single fee every year. That's, we have to figure out what's fair for that. And it would just be much easier for that in that circumstance. But maybe there's others too, and something I think we're going to have to make some recommendations about at some point. Eric, did you want to jump in? I see you kind of looking like you want to say something.
Yeah, I'm furiously writing down notes, actually. And thank you, Supervisor Bartlett, for teeing this up. Great information, great presentation. Myself being a rural resident, I was doing the calculations. I was like, wow, okay. I appreciate the information. I'm kind of, obviously putting on my representing the trucking industry hat, I'm kind of the outlier on I appreciate everybody's comments on we need to transition. But from where I'm at, in my perspective, I'm more on the slow and go approach with respect to the goods movement industry, in particular the trucking industry, because there's so many things that we have to consider and take into account For one, you're talking about fleet size, you're talking about out-of-state competition that goes along with Supervisor Bartlett's comments on how are we going to be able to track that. I know that we're working on those things. There's the East Coast Coalition that's working through these issues. We have our own little working group going on. We're also working with Hannah and her team on putting together some carriers to run the pilot on the rate setting. So we're in kind of a different arena than the general passenger driving vehicle public. So I'm kind of, like I said, I'm kind of the outlier on, let's make sure we're doing our due diligence, looking at everything possible to make sure that we get it right. Speaking on the getting it right, I'm a little concerned with the last few meetings where there's been a discussion on ideas or suggestions on what I like to call hanging additional ornaments on the Christmas tree. What this group has been operating under since its inception is looking at ways at substituting the straight rate setting fee with the tax. And, if we start getting a little bit more or adding a little bit more, I think the public's going to have tremendous issues with it. And it's something that we're going to have to really look into and address. So that's just my comments, but great information. I really, like I said, I was doing the calculations for me, and it's probably time for me to change some cars, but anyways, thank you.
Go ahead.
Just quickly, and thank you, these are all really, really good points. By the way, in response, Eric, to your last comment about, we're making it more complex, I would argue that we could potentially, if we move to a RUC, what if we removed vehicle registration fees or something? So potentially, maybe, we could do a sort of more holistic look and perhaps even simplify it for the public in some way. So you just have like one road charge rather than all these different ones. The other thing I just wanted to mention quickly is that if anybody, works with boards or commissions or groups and would like me to present these findings, assuming I'm not busy with conflict, I would be happy to. The whole reason I do this work is because I hope it can help inform policy. So you can help me spread the word in that way if it's useful to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else among the committee members?
Yeah. Hi. This is Axel. I just wanted to again also thank you, Dr. Agarwal. This is super helpful. And I'll just say that I echo appreciation for considering equity and those dynamics in this process, because if we don't plan for that at the beginning, then we're thinking about that the negative impacts when it's too late. And so I appreciate the thoughtfulness that goes behind that in the beginning stages as we are now.
Great. Thank you. Any other comments from members of the committee? Okay, Doug, do we have members of the public?
Hi, Commissioner Liu, this is Kayla. We do have some written questions right now, and then we have some hands raised. So I'll take care of the written questions, and then I'll turn it over to Celeste to take care of the hands raised.
Sounds good.
So first up for our written questions, we have from Rob Ball. They asked, this data is pre-COVID. Did you consider comparing the data with some of the more recent big data sources as a validation step?
So this is an excellent point. This is 2017 data. And not only has COVID intervened, but more people have electric vehicles and things. So actually, I didn't mention it here, but one recommendation we have is that the state of California start collecting this sort of statewide household travel data on a more regular basis. I don't know if that's every 2 years or 3 years or what. There isn't any other data source I'm aware of that comes even remotely close at a state level to giving us this fine-grained information about households that allows us to compare people of different income levels and such, or where they lived. So for example, even if you look at things like the cell phone traces and all, that can tell us how much mileage, how many miles there are on a particular freeway and how congested it is. But we don't know anything about the characteristics of the people in those vehicles. And so that's what's really special about these household travel surveys is we know about the people, the households, we know about the vehicles they're in, and we know about not only just how much they're driving, but sort of where they're making those trips. And it's expensive data to collect, but I think that, and you know, it's also as part of a sort of ongoing equity analysis, it would be very valuable.
So Sarah from Assemblymember Friedman's office, you might want to make a note of that.
Thank you, Dr. Agrawal. We do have one more question. Well, we have a few more. The next one is from Victor Morellis. Did you mention if these slides are uploaded along with the report?
I'm going to send, as I said, I saw my table had some things swapped, and I'm going to also add the publication link. So I will send that today to staff, and you're welcome to publish it, email it out, distribute it in whatever way you like.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Rob Ball. How would you anticipate the proliferation of ZEVs in higher income households since this 2017 data was collected affect the equity of switching to a road user charge in rural areas? Would that likely expand or shrink the gap between rural and urban equity?
So I am not an expert on exactly where zero emission vehicles are being adopted. I know the kind of general rule of thumb or conventional wisdom is that it's mostly urbanites, but I actually just saw, and I didn't have time to read it yet, an article that was titled something like, you know, EV supporters are not who you think they are. And I read the first paragraph, and they said there was actually a lot more interest among rural households and some others. So if we had all the ZEV adoptions in urban areas and very few in rural, and if we kept the gas tax system that we have right now, yes, the kind of division between what rural and urban households on average are paying would certainly increase.
Thank you, Dr. Agrawal.
Yeah. Another thing, I don't know, I would think this might be happening elsewhere in the state, but it would be very interesting to see data on exactly sort of statewide, where are those electric vehicles right now?
Thank you. We have one last written question for the moment. This is from Farah Brock. Hi, Asha. This is very helpful information. Do you think moving to a RUC will affect how much people drive and the patterns you've found?
So that's a great question, because anytime you change the cost of driving, it has at least a very small impact on how much people drive. Now, my sense is that if we decided not only that we were going to go to a RUC, but we were going to start charging 10 times as much or 5 times as much, you know, we wanted to collect hugely more revenue than we are, that would be quite a noticeable, you know, change in the cost of driving for people. But if we're just essentially replacing the revenue we're raising with the fuel tax with revenue raised for road user charge, you know, we saw those estimates that it would change costs by a few dollars a week at most. I don't think that that's enough that it would likely change behavior. Now, if we don't transition to a RUC, then people, of course, will see. Well, actually, and I should also say that when you buy an electric vehicle, I don't think anyone goes, yoo-hoo, I don't have to pay the state gas tax anymore. They're just like, woohoo, I don't have to buy gas. And so they're not thinking of the tax portion of it separately. And also one final point, because I know I'm going on here, you know, the price of gas we've all seen is swinging up and down, mostly up recently, wildly by, you know, far more of a change than any of the policies we're discussing would ever be. So, I mean, people are used to the price of driving fluctuating quite a bit more than we're talking about.
Thank you, Dr. Agrawal. We do have a hand raised, so I'll turn it over to Celeste for her to handle that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kayla. Stephanie Ross, I've unmuted you.
I'm sorry, I accidentally hit that when I was trying to see the chat. No comment. Thank you.
All right, that concludes our raised hands then.
Okay, great. And that wraps us up on this item. I will confess, as I have many times before, that I have such an old electric vehicle that I pay nothing. Nothing. I mean, I don't even have to pay the $100 a year that people who have bought electric vehicles in the last few years have had to pay. So, and I'm as willing as anyone to get this road user charge in place so that I can start paying my fair share and everybody else can stop paying gas taxes, at least state gas taxes, because I agree with Supervisor Bartlett. This is something we need to do. We need to do quickly. And I think the research that you shared with us today is so helpful in answering those questions, because otherwise we're kind of flying blind, right? Are the differences significant or not? And while you do see some changes, and ones that obviously could be tweaked by changing the parameters and the flatness of the rate and everything, but it's not night and day comparison, even with a 6% administrative fee, right? So this is really interesting research. I appreciate it, and thank you for sharing it with us. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break and come back, allow everyone an opportunity to take care of their needs, be they email or biological or whatever. And we will see you back in 5 minutes, which should be 10:37, but we all know is probably going to be 10:40. So we will see you in 5 minutes, okay? Okay, let's call the meeting back to order and move on to agenda item number 7, the draft pilot design recommendations. This is an action item, and we plan to spend about 50 minutes on this. Hannah will present the recommended design aspects for the SB 339 road charge pilot program. These pilot design recommendations will be shared with commissioners at our October 2022 meeting in Santa Barbara before final approval in February of 2023. So Hannah, it is on you.
Sure. Thanks, Commissioner Liu. And I wanted to say in response to the last presentation that staff are working on trying to get additional detail on potential administrative costs for a road charge program. And TAM put together a series of spreadsheets that look at the gap between projected revenue and what we would need to collect to maintain that compared to the $100 fee that is paid by zero emission vehicles and that would be paid if you take CARB's advanced clean cars regulations into account. So we'll be running that by your management, but it's something that we might share with the TAC in the future once it's reviewed. And TAM also put together a map that's interesting. It shows miles per gallon vehicle type by zip code. So that's an interesting indicator of vehicle ownership. It's taken quite a bit of work, but it's a great visualization. So that also might be a resource we could share in the future. But getting to this presentation, so we, just as a reminder, what the Senate Bill 339 required was that the TAC would provide the California State Transportation Agency and Caltrans with recommendations on the design of a pilot by July 1st of 2023, and that we would provide one of the 2 rates in the bill for the pilot. So as we've discussed before, we're working on the rate and we will provide that in early next year. And this is our first draft of the design recommendations. I've tried to include the right level of detail so that we can walk through this with you. Yes, so hopefully it's not too detailed and also not too cumbersome. And just a big thanks to Tam, who did a lot of the background work on these recommendations. So let me get started. Thank you. We broke the recommendations apart into 5 different areas. So I'll go over each area and then at the end I'll stop and we can talk about the areas one at a time so you can let me know what you think about each piece as we go along. So the first one is commercial account managers. Tam and I looked at a lot of documents that had been done in the past on these, and we also did just some research about them, and these are the recommendations we came up with for the pilot. Next slide, please. You can keep going. Okay, so I put the recommendations on the first slide, and then I have some examples after that in each category. So here's the recommendations for commercial account managers. Establish reporting requirements through a service level agreement, and I can talk more about that in a second. Use a report card to track commercial account manager performance. Establish a certification process that's based on programs like what the Department of Motor Vehicles has. Their business partner automation process already has a certification and enrollment process for third parties, and have the Department of Motor Vehicles administer the pilot, since they have a lot of the vehicle information that would be used in the pilot. Okay, so I can talk a little bit more about these recommendations. And we're assuming, I want to point out, that we should use commercial account managers. That's just an efficiency and cost assumption that we made and based these recommendations on, because we know that Lee Tien especially has raised some concerns in the past about privacy related to commercial account managers. But when we talk about the privacy section, and Terry, feel free to make a comment if you want. We feel like some of those risks can be mitigated by a good privacy policy.
I mean, I'll wait and hold comments to the end, but I will, say, as soon as you say those words, I know that Lee and I have concerns, but I believe we've both come around to understand that the commercial account manager is the best recommendation, and we just need to be vigilant on the security and privacy issues associated with that and on communication around it.
Yes, we totally agree. Thank you. Yeah, we agree. And we want to work with Caltrans to help them however we can to do that. So next slide, please. A service level agreement is basically a contract that stipulates a lot of the requirements that we want to hold commercial account managers to, including requirements for their subcontractors. And what we really wanted to focus on was that for the pilot, can you go to the next slide, please? We recommend that whoever the administering agency is, use a report card, and we made a template based on some information that we'd seen that includes things like total number of customer calls, email response time, how many hours was the system down for maintenance. And we think that something like this should be used so that we can really keep a close eye on how the CAMs are performing even during the pilot. And this can be incorporated into the service level agreement document. It's a way to ensure customer service. It also allows issues to be elevated to the state administrator when necessary. Next slide, please. So this is actually a look at what we're recommending the kind of process be set up to actually enroll the commercial account managers. So at the beginning, before we allow them to do business on behalf of the state, we need to list out a number of requirements that they need to meet. And so what we're recommending is that we look closely at existing DMB processes to create the certification and enrollment process. And so these are some examples that are in place that we saw. So the commercial account manager would submit an application to the DMB. They would have a security pre-implementation checklist. In other words, unless they had certain capabilities from like a data security standpoint, they wouldn't be able to provide services. They would have to sign an information security agreement. They would have to comply with the privacy policy, comply with the service level agreement, and have a personal history screening and do things like live scan. We just pulled out some of the more relevant examples. So we're recommending that a process like this be developed for the pilot if possible, so that we can have it in place and start to build on it for a regular program. Next slide, please. I think that might be the end of this one, actually. Oh, this is an example, but we wanted to point out that for the pilot, no matter how many commercial account managers are used, it's going to be a volume-ish, there's going to be a big volume difference in a regular program. It's partly why commercial account managers are needed, because for the pilot, you're looking at 400 to maybe 5,000 or a little more participants. But there's close to 27, there's actually a little over 27 million registered vehicles in California right now. So the volume of user base that these managers are going to have is large. It's one reason why we need to have commercial account managers, but also we need to make sure that they have the capability to support this number of end users. Then next slide, please. So that wraps it up on commercial account managers. And do you mind going back to the first slide that actually shows the recommendations, and then we can talk about any question. It's actually keep going back down. There you go. Yep. Thanks. So, does anyone have any thoughts, questions, or comments on these recommendations? Supervisor Bartlett?
Thank you, Hannah. So this is really great information, and I think a report card for the commercial account managers is essential. Check with agencies like that have the use of transponders or electronic tolling, because if you take a look at some of the major agencies out there, whether it be the transportation corridor agencies, the Orange County Transportation Authority, they're dealing with hundreds of thousands of vehicles and accounts and millions of transactions. And they've all got commercial account managers that they have contracts with, and they can tell you about, best practices, lessons learned, and really give us some good information so we don't have to reinvent the wheel to a great extent, because they've got a proven track record over decades of how to handle commercial account managers, keep information private. I know that at TCA, I think all of the data gets scrubbed every, week or on a periodic basis, so that it gets wiped out of the system, so that there is, that opportunity for a breach and cybersecurity attack and that type of thing. But every agency works a little bit differently, but they've all got decades of experience and best practices, and we can certainly learn a lot from them and incorporate all of those great features into what we're doing.
Okay, that's really good feedback. I'll follow up on that. And
okay.
Lauren Prahoda, I know, also has done some work. I know she's met with some tolling agencies and looked at the possibility of having a tolling agency function like a commercial account manager in a road charge program. So I know she also has some information about that. So I'll follow up with her and see if we can look into any of their best practices and lessons learned.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Agarwal.
Thank you. This was really useful. I echo Lisa's point. It seems like it makes sense to look at the toll operators. I actually had a question, which is, has anyone talked to the DMV? And I don't know if the CTC is in conversation with them or if CalStar or Caltrans is, but it would seem like it might be useful if we haven't started that.
You mean did you say, has anyone talked to the DMV?
The DMV, are they on board with the idea that they might be administering this? And I don't know, it just, yeah, especially if they're going to be doing it for the pilot, since that's coming up.
I am going to let my colleague Lauren Prahoda, who I believe is on the line, respond to that, because we have met with them once. We've actually met with them more than once, but more recently for the pilot, we met with them in Caltrans more than once. I think yeah.
Last thing I'll say before we can hear from Lauren is I could imagine it might be useful to have the DMV actually participating in the pilot too, because if they are in the long run actually going to be administering it, it would give them really valuable, test run of their processes.
Yeah, well, just to be clear, all the recommendations that we're making right now, all these draft ones that you're seeing in front of you are for the pilot. And we tried to make them with the statewide program in mind, because, we're hoping that the pilot is going to help build the basis for that. But we are just speaking specifically to the pilot. Lauren, did you want to comment now, or do you want to comment later?
Sure.
I don't know. Yeah.
Sure, I'm happy to. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So SB 339 does direct the California State Transportation Agency to work with other impacted agencies to develop a process to administer a road charge. So that would definitely involve conversations with the DMV, and that is something that the administration would be doing as part of this effort. Just again, though, timing wise, the TAC and their recommendations are kind of coming before, so we have an opportunity to listen to your recommendations, but I expect that would happen. Also a discussion of admin costs at that time. I did also want to note to Supervisor Bartlett's comment, in our next pilot, not SB 339, but our public-private roads pilot, which we expect to go live next March, we are partnering with TCA in kind of a little small mini pilot to use them as a commercial account manager to administer a road charge in that effort. So we're already talking a lot with TCA about how things work with them and how it's going to work in our pilot. So we are definitely leveraging the tolling community and trying to learn everything that we can from them.
Thanks, Lauren. Lauren Kay, did you have a comment? Okay. Thank you. All right, I think we can move on then, unless there are any more hands raised. Kayla.
Hi, Hannah. We do have a written question for this item. Would you mind taking that now?
Sure.
Okay, so this is from Rob Ball. Bear with me, it's a little lengthy. Since an RUC would help fund maintenance, has the committee considered piloting an RUC on commercial vehicles which are responsible for 80% of the wear and tear on major routes? If so, why are we not doing a pilot on commercial vehicles and trucks? And then Rob also mentioned they sent a link and then also said that they are open with partnering with the state.
Sure. Actually, we haven't gotten to the part about pilot participants yet, but we are trying to work with Eric Sauer and his trucking association to include commercial vehicles in the pilot. And Eric can speak more to this, but I think there's some fees that truckers already pay for the additional wear and tear on the roads caused by the weight of those vehicles. Eric, did you have any comments on that?
Yeah, just a quick comment. In addition to all the other registration fees the trucking industry is subject to what they call a heavy vehicle use tax and what we call weight fees in the state. So they pay fees into both of those buckets in addition to the other fees for registration and whatnot.
Great, thank you. Any more comments or questions? Okay, let's move on to the next one. Okay, thanks. You can go to the next slide. Okay, here's the summary of the recommendations related to pilot participants. So we have a list of the categories of participants that we're recommending for the pilot. The reason we chose these is either because they represent an equity concern. Specifically, we want to think about how a road charge might be impacting households with low incomes and households with medium to moderate incomes. So that's why we recommended those. The other reason we chose some of these groups is because they're vehicle groups that are likely to be first impacted by a road charge program. So like electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles. If there is a phased-in implementation, these types of vehicles may well be the first to be transitioned over. So just getting a head start at looking at those vehicles would be good. And then the third type that we picked are vehicle groups that are likely to be more impacted by the transition to a road charge than some of the other users. So super commuters, and Asha already talked a little bit about these, but rural drivers, urban drivers, getting some data on these and how they respond to different fees would be useful, we feel like. So we tried to strike a balance between what we thought would be useful to learn in this pilot before a statewide implementation and not getting so ambitious that we are overextending the state. So that's how we came up with that list. And commercial trucks, I put that separately because it's kind of in its own category. We're recommending that commercial trucks probably only really be in the flat rate group. But we're still working with Eric on including those. And then, so that's the first recommendation, is to include those categories of participants. Then the second one, so Tam actually did the math to figure out what is a statistically significant sample size. And so we're recommending that if we want to test these out, We have a statistically significant sample size for each rate group and each category of participant in each rate group. And then that would give us 95% confidence of accuracy.
Excuse me, Hannah.
Yeah.
Is that 384 in each of those bullet points?
Right, at times 2, except for commercial trucks, which is only once. So actually, when we worked it out,
what do you mean times 2?
I mean, like, so actually, it might be easier to explain if we jump ahead for a second. Brandy or Doug, whoever is running the slides, can you go forward for a minute to the slide that like has the little boxes like a flow chart? Yeah. Okay, so see how the 2 circles at the top of this graphic are showing that there's going to be the per mile rate, that's the one that we as the TAC or you as the TAC are responsible to come up with. And then there's going to be the EPA rate, which is actually specified in statute. I don't know if you remember, but we actually showed you an example of how that would play out. And we worked with Max Baumhefner to make sure we got the intent of that rate correct when we did that example. And so those are the 2 rate groups. And so then the little green boxes underneath. So think of commercial trucks in its own little category. But the other ones, we would need to have 384 people in each of those green boxes for each rate. So we'd need to have low income in the per mile group and low income in the EPA group if we wanted to test the impact on low income people using both a fee per mile rate and the EPA fuel economy rate. So if we want to test both, we have to do it for each rate group. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see what you're doing, and I don't want to bog down the conversation, but it is a little bit weird because everybody's going to be in more than one group. And so if you were to be doing this as a kind of a traditional survey research, like when you get calls from pollsters, you would survey an entire population and then make sure you have representation from each of these groups. So you would decide that you would be you'd be having your sample, 1,500 or 2,000 drivers, and they half get the EPA, half get the other. But then you would have, as sort of the state population is divided, you'd have a certain number urban and a certain number rural, and then you'd have a certain number in regular vehicles, a certain number in electric and hybrid, and then you'd have an income division as well. Now maybe there's a good reason to have each of these separate, but I think it might make it hard to compare them if you have, for example, all of your low income are rural and all of your urban are not low income. If you're not testing for that, if you're not stratifying for that, you may get some very, very odd results. So anyway, I don't want to bog down. I'm just wondering if you've thought through all that or talked to anybody about how that works.
Yeah, we did. And we were trying to be a little bit ambitious because what we were considering was if we pick the most applicable group for each participant. This is assuming we were able to get a little over 5,000 participants, which in and of itself may be a challenge. But ideally, if that were the case, then we could pick the attributes, like based on the attributes of the participant, we would put them in the group that most fit that person. Because we wanted to be able to isolate each group and look at that one thing. But just because we wanted to be able to do that wouldn't mean that we wouldn't do cross-referencing of the groups. That would totally make sense. And we'd have that data, so we'd be able to look at it against each other. It wouldn't prevent us from doing that. It would just make sure that we had a lot of data so that we could be fairly confident about the result. But I totally see what you're saying. Yes, Dr. Agrawal?
Just to build on Lauren's point, I do think you can probably achieve the goal that you have with fewer respondents or participants, because let's just say I'm in there and I'm paying the flat rate. I'm an urban person. I'm going to be in, not your low income, in some upper income group. So I will fill more than one of those boxes. And then the other thing is that it may be useful, because I've been running surveys with Qualtrics, and they call them nested quotas. So you could think of, for example, that you have, we want maybe 800 low-income people, and at least 300 of them have to be paying the fee per mile, and 300 of them have to be urban, and 300 have to be rural. The more of this nesting you do, the harder it is to find people, but it also does, the trade-off is it allows you to compare for, like, do you want to be able to prepare low-income people in rural versus urban areas? And at some point, it's just too much. The pilot's not going to be able to do everything, and that's fine.
Right.
But I do think probably the number could be smaller than.
And Hannah, the number of people you need in each category is going to be related to the variability within that category. And then the key question is variability of what? Is it miles driven? Is it some other attribute or parameter that you're concerned about? So yeah, I'm not sure how you got to 384 as a number, but there is from a methodological and statistical standpoint, there's probably a way to get that if you had some data on the different amounts of variability within each category.
Yeah.
As
well,
an addition to nesting. Yeah.
And I think I have a slide that summarizes it, but what we did was we pulled the total amount of drivers in the state for each category, and then calculated an average, I believe, based on those totals is how we got to that. Tam can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we would just need to be careful about how we, this is what I mean. We need to be careful about how we message these findings, because, for example, if we do what you're suggesting, which I'm fine with, and I'm here to support you, so this is actually your decision. You guys can decide what you want to recommend. If we say we only need 384 people in each category for both rate groups, or there's some cross-cutting categories here, then we just need to know that if we're talking about how sure we are about how accurate the data is, that we're talking about it based on those groups together, not isolated from one another. Because what we're suggesting would allow us to isolate each group and say we're 95% sure this data is accurate for each and every little group that we're talking about here, even in isolation. And then if it was cross-cutting, it would be even a greater degree of certainty. But if we're gonna, allow less people, then that's okay. We just have to be clear that we're looking at some different categories together, which is okay. It just changes how we talk about it. But Director Weiss, did you have a comment?
Well, I was just going to say, this is something that we can continue to work on. We can work with Asha and others who have expertise in this area to kind of refine this, and when we bring it back, provide some more detail.
Yeah.
Let me just say that I don't have any objection in principle to the categories. I mean, maybe there's a little tweaking there, but I think that as far as informing the legislature and the administration and interested parties, they'll be interested in what these subgroups, the experience of the subgroups, but they'll be most interested in the experience of the general public or of the general driver. And so I think you're going to want to start with, excuse me, determining have an overall population of drivers that is somewhat reflective of something. And then make sure that you have subgroups within those, within that general population, because the overall, I don't think that the consumers of this are going to be immediately said, oh, focusing in on super commuters, for example. They're going to want to know, well, what's the overall experience of the California drivers? And so I would start with there, determine how many that you need for your sample, and then try to fill it in with the subgroups. That's my recommendation.
Okay, yeah, we can, so we'll think about this more, and we have time between now and when we come back to this group in early next year with final recommendations to think about it more. So we'll do that. And I think what I might do, if you're okay with it, for when I present these recommendations to the commissioners in October, is I'll just take out the specific number. So I'll recommend that we have a statistically significant sample size, but I won't say what that is, because the concept is good, but we can work out the details between now and then.
Well, and I'm also fine saying this is a number that was talked about at the TAC, and this is what we heard. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Hannah, I think where we've landed this time is pretty similar to where we landed last time when this question was looked at for the first pilot. But I know Dr. Agarwal has been raising her hand quietly for a minute or two, so let me call on her.
I was just going to say, I have the feeling on this particular subject, you've heard some input. Sounds like staff have some ideas, and so I'm fine with all of that. I just wanted to ask if we're ready to move on for commercial trucks, and Eric, of course, could say more, but I don't think all trucks are monolithic and the same. And so I'm sure it would be a less fine-grained sort of quotas, but for the commercial, for the trucks, would there be any point in having a few categories there? Because if you've got, all trucks owned by UPS, I can see, a small firm that some family owns 3 trucks would be like, well, but that's not reflective of me. So I don't know if that's something you've already talked about, and Eric, you may have insights.
Yeah, no, good points. Throughout this entire process, we've been diligently since the beginning of the TAC and then the former pilot. We've been doing our best to get a representative sample of all segments of the industry captured in any sort of pilot that we do, just because they're used in different applications. So you have so many, and just to rattle off a few, you have the agricultural sector, you have the heavy specialized, which is moving cranes and whatnot. You have the regular over-the-road 53-foot trailer. There's so many different, you have the intermodal industry that's usually doing the shorter runs. So we're trying to do our best in capturing as many volunteers in those pilot to account for those types of situations.
Yeah, so we're working with Eric to do what we can on that front. Thanks, Eric.
And again, it may be more detailed than you want to present to the commission, but it might be worth, as you update these slides, just somehow indicating that you're aware that there are different groups, and we'll strive to include some, maybe even listing sample categories like the ones Eric just mentioned.
Thank you.
Hannah, this is Farah from the Assembly Transportation Committee. And I wanted to comment on the pilot participants and some of this issue of people falling within multiple categories. And I think from a legislative perspective, sometimes the first lens we put on things is the income group. And then within that would want to see, how do the super commuters perform? How do the rural versus the urban perform? So, within low income, how do some of those subcategories break out, rather than the categories being an equal weight? And I don't really know how functionally you would do that when enrolling participants, but I think that would provide some of the more meaningful data when we wanted to try and drill down so that we weren't putting people in one box when maybe the bigger box is that they're low income, but then there are things within it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's helpful. Okay, we will look at that because we can look at it that way.
And another question I wanted to raise was just, are fleets going to be included in this somehow? Like fleet vehicles that may be operated by a commercial company?
Yes. So what Eric and I have been working on is to see from the Trucking Association which of the fleets that he represents are willing to offer up some trucks for the pilot. So we don't know yet if it's going to be several kinds of trucks from one fleet or if it's going to be like more than one fleet offering up a couple of trucks. We kind of have to gauge interest because they have to be willing to give us some information and actually participate in the pilot in the first place. But we are trying to coordinate that.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Asha. Asha, you're on mute.
Sorry. In terms of fleets, and again, the pilot can't do everything, but have you thought about including some passenger vehicles that are part of fleets, whether that's, Caltrans' own state vehicles or vehicles that are, owned by a city for services or whatever else, or Uber or Lyft vehicles?
Yeah, we did. So we talked kind of extensively actually with Caltrans about including Caltrans vehicles in the pilot. But in the end, that wasn't really something that Caltrans was ready to pursue for a number of reasons. And then the reason we didn't do TNCs is because they just looked at those in the 4-phase demonstration. That was one of the phases that they had included, and they have a final report that should be coming out soon on that. So that's why we didn't include those. And yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, unless there are more questions on this, let's go back up to the top and I'll just review the other recommendations and we can move on. We'll keep working
Hannah,
on
we do
this
have one question from the public on this.
Oh, sure.
Kayla, you want to take that?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Hannah, this is more of a comment from Norbert Dahl. If the goal of the pilot study is to collect representative data of motorized vehicle users in California, then the methodology for the study should be based on the demographics rather than on a pre-selected population subset that excludes other subsets.
That's actually a good point. And the reason that we approached it the way that we did is because in the 2017 pilot, there was extensive research done on that basis. So they took, and so we re-reviewed all the 2017 pilot final reports before we made these recommendations. And especially in the appendices of that final report, you'll see a lot of statistics about the participant groups that they tested in the 2017 pilot. And that's what they did in that pilot, is that they tried to get a demographic that was indicative of the entire state. And so this is perhaps a smaller or more focused pilot than that pilot. It may not be smaller depending on the number of participants we end up with, but it's definitely more focused. And so we were trying to, understanding that body of work had been done, kind of focused in on, well, what are some of the groups that we need to know more about before we start phasing in our statewide program. So that's why we approached it a little differently in our recommendations for this pilot. But we do understand that it is important to test the demographics of the entire state.
So Hannah, this I think raises a pretty fundamental question that I kind of commented on last time in terms of the variability. It boils down to, what are we trying to do and what are we trying to measure? And in one sense, we kind of don't care who's participating, because we want to make sure that we could set up a system in which we can collect revenue and it would work, right? So that's one aspect of this. And that, I think, is a completely separate question than what we've kind of gone down this rabbit hole into now, which is we also want to get data on the experience that different types of drivers have, right? And I think we want to measure satisfaction. We want to measure, variability and how much, they'd be paying and all of a few other things. But I think we need to step back and really think about the purpose of the study. And one of them is to, compare rate 1 versus rate 2, right? The per mile versus the fuel economy one. But there's a lot more that we would like to get accomplished through this pilot. And in research settings, we talk about independent and dependent variables. We need to focus a bit on the dependent variable side of what is it that we would like to measure within these subgroups. And that will help define for us how many, based on the variability of that within each subgroup, how many people we would need to fill each category to get good data. It's a little, I think we're confusing things a little bit by stepping away from the fundamental thing, which was see if you can figure out a way to collect money. Because we want to get more done than that, and we should be getting more done than that. But once we start doing that, it adds layers of complexity. And what really matters is, to some extent, what we want to measure.
No, that's true. You're 100% correct that the intent of this pilot is to test revenue collection, and that's what we had originally proposed in the annual report when this was a legislative recommendation, and that's what the bill says that the intent of the pilot is for. And we know, like you said, the reason that the 2 rates are included in the bill is because there was an interest in also testing the impact that these 2 rates would have on the participants. So we did try to make our decisions be guided by those 2 factors. It's another reason that we limited the participant categories, because we wanted to keep it, we didn't want to make it so complicated that we were taking away from the revenue collection piece. And so that's a good point. And I do think that we can figure out the way that makes the most sense to organize these participants. The bill does say that they will be randomly assigned to one of 2 rate groups. And so we'll keep working on the number of people in each category and how we organize that. But in general, in terms of the types of categories that you see here, we were really just trying to be the most helpful for what Caltrans and CalSTA might want to look at before they start phasing in a pilot. That's kind of also where we were coming from. But you're right, we want to stay focused. Let me ask this question. Not in terms of the number in each group or how we organize the participants, but in terms of the categories themselves that we have here, does anyone have a major concern with any of the categories that we're listing, like electric vehicles, hybrid, or any of the TAC members? Okay, well, I think that's a good basis, and I liked Farah's comment about looking at different demographics within income levels. So we'll keep working on the detail of this one. All right, thank you. Okay, let's move on. Doug or Brandy or Justin, can you go to the slide that has the recommendations on it again, like for the pilot participants? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so number 3 is we want to reach out to recruit participants as early as possible, because based on what we read, there are some categories like low income is one that are very difficult to recruit. And so we want to use some targeted recruiting methods. And we also want to offer monetary incentives to our participants, which is fairly normal to do. for pilots. Okay, we can go down to, I just have a couple of slides about these. We don't have to spend a long time on them. So here's some examples. Some of them were also included in the 2017 pilot. But what we were thinking might be a good idea is also to invite low-income participants through some of the advocacy partner contacts that we have now. Like the commission has started, these equity roundtables and things like that. We're a little bit more connected to some of these groups than we used to be in the past. So we could use some of those relationships to try to let people know about this opportunity to participate in a pilot and try to reach out to them specifically. And we definitely recommend starting to reach out to like rural participants and low-income participants as soon as possible, because those are the ones that take the longest typically. You can go to the next slide. Okay, I think that's the end. And there was something else I was going to say. Oh, we don't want we don't want to discourage participants from, being in the pilot. So that's one reason we want to offer monetary incentives, because they will be paying their traditional fuel tax and then getting reimbursed. And then they'll be paying whatever the road charge amount is. So we just want to make sure that they still have a financial incentive to participate. So that's why we're recommending monetary incentives. Does anyone have any? Yeah.
Anna, we had one more question for Mr. Dahl. Does urban include suburban?
Well, I think that we haven't gotten as far as defining the geographic boundaries of our definitions yet. So we would have to agree on a term for urban and like the population amount that we're really talking about, but we haven't done that yet. Does anyone have any other thoughts or questions on the pilot participants? Okay, let's talk about privacy and security. So there's actually been quite a body of work completed on the privacy and security aspects of a road charge. There was extensive work done on this in the 2017 pilot, and then more recently, Terry and Lee from our TAC also developed a list of privacy and security recommendations. And if you remember, we were going to present those to CalSTA and the commissioners, but we decided to wait because we decided instead to include them in these design recommendations. So what we're recommending is that we follow the privacy and security policies that were developed in the 2017 pilot. In a previous presentation to the road charge TAC on this, we included a separate document that is a list of the privacy and security policies from the 2017 pilot. So that should actually still be on our website if you want to go back and take a look at that. But we're recommending that that be followed. And then we're recommending that we incorporate the 2021 recommendations created by Terry and Lee. And we're also recommending that we include lessons learned from the 2021, and I think it may be draft, so I'm not sure if it's public, but Caltrans, since these recommendations are for CalSTA and Caltrans, they obviously have this document. It's the draft Caltrans data security report from the 4-phase demonstration pilot. And that is a very good document. It has some great recommendations. So we're recommending that where feasible, those recommendations be included in the pilot for data security. And I think we just had a couple examples. I'll really only focus on the 2021 recommendations. If you could go to the next slide. You can skip that one. Okay, so here's some of well, actually this encompasses the recommendations for the pilot. There was a few more than this, but we just pulled out the ones that are applicable to the pilot that Terry and Lee came up with. So involve legal early in design, include decisions about when it's okay to share personal information in the privacy policy, and use the minimum data necessary principle. Require account manager compliance with privacy policy. Require account managers to destroy personally identifiable information after 30 days. And review mileage to determine if fraud is likely. Terry, did you want to say anything? I saw you come up on the screen.
I just wanted to be here to be ready in case I needed to say something.
Thank you.
But I think you're capturing the nature of our discussions. And I think for the rest of the board, for them to understand that, you know, there's been a lot of work here and that Lee and I really took some time and did some separate work so that we could feel comfortable with this.
Yeah, you really did. They did a lot of work and we really appreciate it. And they also even reviewed like the language that would come up for the participants when they're trying to enroll in the pilot and things like that. So,
I feel pretty good. I feel pretty good about it because of the different places that we touched. I mean, we'll continue to have concerns, but some of it we understand are more systemic and cultural and social concerns that's beyond this pilot to address.
Great. Thanks, Terry. Supervisor Bartlett, did you have a comment? Oh. All right. Does anyone have, can you go to the next slide really quick, actually? I forget what that is. Oh, this is just a slide about the data security report. It was very interesting. It covered 5 major subsystems: data collection, transaction processing, account management, administration, and a data clearinghouse. And so it was super helpful just thinking about the technical aspects of security. The recommendations were extensive, so we didn't include them here. Plus the report, I believe, was a draft, but we can incorporate it by reference. Does anyone have questions or thoughts on the privacy and security recommendations? Okay. All right, let's move on. And thanks, Terry and Lee, for the work you already did on that to make us feel comfortable with that. Okay, so revenue collection. This is the second to last one. And this is kind of the heart of what we're really trying to accomplish with this pilot, or one of the two things. So and I just want to say thanks to the Department of Tax and Fee Administration and the State Controller's Office. They were really helpful. We kind of worked with them to figure out what the process would look like for revenue collection in this pilot. And we have a graphic about that, but we're recommending that that be followed. We're recommending that a commercial account manager calculate the road charge payments that are owed by the participants and the reimbursement. And we've developed some tools that could be used to do that. We don't want to require that those be used, but we could just give them to Caltrans and CalSTA as an example. And then we're recommending, sorry, I have a cold, excuse me, that we offer a few there's some payment methods we kind of signaled out to recommend that we offer to participants in the pilot, and some data collection methods. So we could go through those slides. Okay, so here's what the revenue collection process looks like. You start with the end user on the left, that's the participant. They give information about their vehicle. They have it when they enroll, they do. So the account manager has information about their vehicle, and then using the data collection method that they choose, they'll also give the account manager information about the miles they drove. So they'll give that to the account manager. Then the account manager will bill them and will also collect payment from them for the road charge fee. Then they'll submit a high-level summary of the data, not all of it, and the revenue to the administering agency. And then the administering agency will submit that to the State Controller's Office. And the State Controller's Office can't accept revenue from private entities, so that's why the administering agency has to be a pass-through. The State Controller's Office recommended that for the pilot, we set up a temporary special fund, an AUD 10 fund. So we would put the revenues in there. And then for reimbursements, the account manager would calculate those and they would be issued by the State Controller's Office. So that's what the revenue collection process looks like. We can move on to the next slide. This is just a look at like what the account manager is responsible for. So to calculate revenue, refund, and collect. It's the visualization. Okay, you can move on. This is an example of some of the things we put together that could be used. These are tools that could be used to calculate both of the rates and both of the road charge rates for the pilot and to calculate the reimbursement. So the commercial account manager could use this or something like this when they're for their work with the end users for the pilot. Okay, we can move on. And then here's the payment methods that we were recommending for the pilot. A bill payment, so either with a paper invoice, online, or through the phone. A prepayment method where you prepay for the miles you drive, but there does have to be a true up in that process to check what you paid versus what you drove at some point. Usage-based insurance, although depending on the time frames of the pilot, that may not work, but it could be an option. Paying you're paying as part of a smog check, so just like a one-time payment. Same issue of timing there. And then paying at the pump or like at charge point if they have an electric vehicle and they wanted to try to implement some of the payment methods that were available in the 4-phase demonstration if possible. That could be an option. So those are the payment methods that we were recommending. And I can go over the data collection. So, and this one I thought it might be helpful to look at the data collection methods that were used in the 2017 pilot and what we're recommending, because we thought that it might be easier to only have a small subset of data collection methods. So in the 2017 pilot, we had the plug-in device, a smartphone, telematics, a time permit, mileage permit, and odometer reading. And for 339, we're thinking maybe it would be better to just kind of stick with a few data collection methods. So we were recommending a plug-in device that's like an OBD device that you would like token that you stick in your car. Telematics if your vehicle already has that, or an odometer reading. And that is the end of our revenue collection recommendations. So does anyone have any thoughts or questions on those?
Hannah, this is Kayla. We do have a few written questions and comments. Are you ready to take those?
Yeah, sure.
So first is a comment from Norbert Dahl. If odometer readings are to serve as an RUC quantification technique, then a separate odometer accuracy study may be needed for accurate data collection. And then a question from Norbert Dahl. How would RUC pilot study participants be exempt from being double taxed? For example, exemption from fuel taxes.
Yeah, that's a good, so I agree with your first comment. And that's something that we can communicate with Caltrans. They may have already done that actually, because they've done odometer readings before, so I'd have to check with them. But that's a good point. And then in response to your question, they're going to get reimbursed their fuel tax based on the, so in like the calculation for reimbursement, what it would look like is that you would take the current fuel tax per mile, and then you would take the MP miles per gallon of their vehicle times the miles that they reported during their reporting period multiplied by the tax per gallon to figure out how much they owed in gas tax and fuel tax, and then you would reimburse that to the participant. So you'd give them that money back, and then the only money that they would owe then is the road charge money. So on an invoice, it could look like you have the miles that they drove at the top and probably their miles per gallon there. Then you have the amount that they paid under using the fuel tax methodology, the amount that they are owing under a road charge, and then less any difference. So the commercial account managers, we decided for the pilot that it would actually be better for the sake of revenue collection to collect the full amount of the road charge to test that out, because that's what we're supposed to be testing, and then to reimburse them separately. So we don't intend to this is not ultimately up to us. We can only recommend. But what we're not recommending, and you can see this if you look at our reimbursement tools, we're not recommending that you take the difference of what they owe in road charge minus what they paid in fuel tax. We're recommending that we collect the full amount of the road charge and that we also reimburse them the fuel tax, just so that we can test out the revenue collection. But we will reimburse them. Does that make sense?
Thanks, Hannah. We actually got an additional written question from Norbert. Will the RUC pilot study control for mandatory VMT reduction, including in the coastal zone?
No, it won't do that.
Thanks, Hannah. That's it for written questions right now, and I'm not seeing any raised hands for public comment.
Okay, thanks. All right. Are we ready to move on to enforcement? This is the last one. Okay. So we only have 2 recommendations on this. They're fairly straightforward. The agency that's responsible for administering the pilot, whoever that may be, should verify vehicle details with the Department of Motor Vehicles, or build an interface between the commercial account managers and the Department of Motor Vehicles, so that it's easy to have that driver and vehicle information at the disposal of the administering agency. In other words, there needs to be sufficient data sharing so that if we need information on a vehicle, we can have that for the pilot with privacy concerns taken into account. So we just want to make sure that all of the IT systems and the interfaces are there that are needed in order to share information appropriately, because the DMV has some information that will be needed by the administering agency and the commercial account managers. And actually, I think that even though this is a recommendation, I believe this is already underway, because if I understand correctly, the DMV has a little money for this pilot to work on IT systems. So it sounds like they are trying to do that. And then even though we're not really recommending, similar to the 2017 pilot, that we follow strict enforcement measures, because these are all volunteers, we're recommending that we start working on enforcement policies for a long-term program. And I want to point out that one of the privacy and security recommendations from Lee and Terry was to have someone check the mileage that was reported in the pilot to just see if it looks like fraud is likely. So we are recommending doing a check on that and kind of trying to follow up if it looks like fraud may be an issue, but we're not recommending strict enforcement measures for the pilot.
So could I say something?
Yeah, please do.
And to the full community, obviously, there's plenty of room for fraud in, self-reporting, odometer readings. But, we're trying to do a pilot and get a feel for it. And I think in an actual program, we'll have better measures for managing that. And then the other thing I'll point out is, by the time you would actually go live on this, there are more and more vehicles that have telematics, more and more acceptable ways to do, a port attachment, more and more. There are many more acceptable ways to do this fully digitally every year that goes by. In 10 years, everybody will have telematics. If by not, in 15 years, we're all going to be EVs. So I think we don't want to spend a lot of time worrying about the fraud aspect of self-reporting and my odometers.
Okay. Yes, Supervisor Bartlett. Thank you, Terry.
Thanks for the great presentation. And I think the component of the DMV is critical, not so much during the pilot phase of things, but as we start to roll it off down the road when we have an actual implementation plan. Because catching fraud is one thing, but I know that, for instance, on the toll roads, we have to catch toll evaders. We have people who drive the toll roads and don't pay the tolls. Some of them have racked up hundreds of thousands of dollars of toll road fees. And so what's been very effective is to work cooperatively with the Department of Motor Vehicles, and we report those kinds of toll evaders to the DMV. The DMV will put a registration hold on that vehicle, and so that person cannot register their vehicle or pay that registration fee for the next year until they get their tolls addressed. And same thing with this. This will get them to pay for their VMT before they can register their vehicle for the next year. So it's a very effective tool. There aren't a lot of people who fall into the category, but I think it's an important tool in the toolbox that we definitely need. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's actually the kind of thing we were trying to get at with our second recommendation, that we know that there are existing enforcement processes in place currently for people who are not, paying taxes like they should in the transportation space. So we're just recommending that sooner rather than later, Caltrans start developing a policy for how they're going to incorporate those kinds of measures into a road charge program, even if it's not part of the pilot. Thank you. Well, that concludes our draft recommendations, and we appreciate your guys' input. Are there any other comments, questions, or thoughts that anyone would like to make at this time?
Hi, this is Stacy again, just no video available, but I have a general question. And, I'm newer to this process. This is my, second official meeting. And so the one thing that popped up for me is the area I live in we're very rural and a lot of low income. So I'm actually, I've been in contact with Lauren about how to be helpful for this pilot program in recruiting some of the folks from my region. But I'm just wondering about the idea of the reimbursement, just kind of with the really low income people paying, the gas tax, also doing the road charge, but then being reimbursed. Has that been discussed, and have you had pushback on that? Just to me, I can just see, pushback when people are really counting pennies, and even though they will be getting that money back, it seems like at first they are paying twice. So I just wanted some clarification on that.
Yeah, that's definitely good feedback and something we want to be sensitive to. We did think through that, and what I wanted to suggest, but we didn't want to put this into the recommendations because we didn't know how much Caltrans would be able to promise up front. But one thing we wanted to work with Caltrans on was if we could maybe pay participants a certain amount up front, so that if they agree to participate in the pilot, they get a payment at the very beginning when they sign up, and then maybe they get like a different one at the end to try to mitigate what you're talking about. But we didn't know how much was possible, and we didn't really want to we thought it might be best to just work that out with them, and that's why we sort of kept the recommendation about monetary incentives a little bit vague. But yeah, that's a good point, and it's something that I'll write down so that we can discuss with Caltrans.
Okay, I appreciate that. I think it'll definitely help to get people to participate. The really rapid rise in gas prices hasn't helped our situation here, and with what we're trying to do to get volunteers. So that would be great. So thank you for doing that.
Okay, that's a good point.
And did we ask for any comments from members of the public who haven't already asked questions? Hannah, what's the action that you wanted us to take on this item?
Right. Oh, thank you for reminding me. So I want you to approve these recommendations as a final draft and approve me presenting them to the commissioners at the October meeting. Because we want to make sure before we give final approval, because once we give final approval, we will start working on like packaging them up and submitting them officially to CalSTA and Caltrans. And of course, we'll have additional conversations with you next year before that happens, but it is a big milestone. So before we did that, we wanted to get commissioner approval and make sure they were okay with them. So
I think the only recommendations that met with really any serious concerns seem to be the first ones about, how many people would participate and how that would be calculated, right?
Yeah, I think that what I will change is that sorry, but can you whoever's doing the slides, can you please go back to the recommendation slide on pilot participants, the one that like lists it out? Thanks.
That one.
Well, that one actually, so that you could see the actual recommendation, I would change the one before. I think it might be the one before this, because this is an example, but okay, this one. So like, this is what I was going to change. See how number 2 says ensure statistically significant sample size? I was just going to end it after that word sample size, and then we can work out the details later. And I think those categories, based on what I heard, are generally okay with everyone. We just have to think about how we want to organize them.
Okay, then I think we are ready to take a motion then.
No, 2 more slides in. Would you click the next slide?
Yeah.
That's fine. And then the next one. Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess the way it was, I guess it was that one of the 384 times 2 that was confusing. So
yeah, there is a slide on that, but we're gonna.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
If those get revised, then I'm fine. But there is a series of slides in here that need to get revised.
Yeah, I think
you mean this slide that is trying to give detail on the 384.
So if I could just jump in, perhaps the direction would be to approve staff and moving forward, continuing to work on this particular issue, and then directing us to share with the commission, engage the consultant, and then to bring final recommendations back to the TAC in early 2023. So that way the direction's clear that we're working on this particular issue.
If only you were allowed to make a motion, Mitch. Asha?
I was just gonna quibble more with the wording on the sample size, but I agree that probably we shouldn't be wordsmithing as a group. So I'm happy to put forward a motion such that we do
what Mitch said.
Such that what Mitch just recommended, that staff are directed to sort of keep working on this, but that the general gist of what Hannah presented looks excellent as a draft to be shared with the commission.
Okay, so do we have a second on that?
Bartlett, second.
Okay, we have Bartlett second. Any comments, questions on the motion? Any members of the public want to speak to the motion? Okay, is Doug still with us, or who's gonna call roll?
Yep, I'm here, and we see no hands raised by the public.
Okay.
Asha Agarwal.
Approve?
Lisa Bartlett.
Yes.
Terry Benzel.
Yes.
Vice Chair Finnegan. Assemblymember Friedman. Lauren Kay.
Yes.
Jim Medaffer. Senator Newman. Pam O'Connor.
Yes.
Robert Poitras. Eric Sauer.
Yes.
Stacy Atkins Salazar.
Yes.
Axel Santana.
Yes.
Li Tien. Chairman Liu.
Aye.
Chairman, the motion is approved.
Wonderful. That's real progress, although it took us quite a bit longer than we anticipated. So we have a few short things before we can wrap up. We were trying to get done before noon. Well, it could be challenging. So we have meeting dates for next year that have been proposed. This is our last meeting for this year, as I said earlier, and for next year, we have some tentative dates that have been scheduled. I think Hannah and Tam are going to go over that schedule for us.
Go ahead, Tam.
So next year in 2023, there will be 5 road-check technical advisory committee meetings that schedule on Friday, February 24, Friday, April 28, Friday, June 2nd, Monday, September 11th, Friday, November 10th. So if there are changes, staff will inform the road-check technical advisory committee members and notify the public if the meetings will be held in person, virtually, or a combination of the two.
It will be nice if we can meet in person. Some of you, I think, only exist in 2 dimensions. Any questions or comments on the schedule, proposed schedule? Any members of the public have any comments? Do we have a motion to adopt?
I move to adopt those dates.
Thank you, Terry.
I second.
Thank you, Asha. So we have a motion and a second. Any comments, questions? Okay, no members of the public, Doug?
Nope, I see no hands raised.
Then feel free to call roll on this item.
Asha Agarwal,
Aye.
Lisa Bartlett,
Yes.
Terry Benzel,
Yes.
Vice Chair Finnegan, Assemblymember Friedman, Lauren Kay,
Yes.
Jim Madaffer, Senator Newman, Pam O'Connor,
Yes.
Robert Poitras, Eric Sauer,
Yes.
Stacy Atkins Salazar,
Yes.
Axel Santana,
Yes.
Li Tien, Chairman Liu.
Aye.
Chair, the motion is approved.
Wonderful. Okay. That brings us to agenda item number 9, which is a review of our action items that we've agreed to today. Hannah, have you been keeping track?
Yes. I'll go over those quickly. Okay, so I am going to reach out to Lauren Perhoda just to make sure that we're connecting on the use of tolling agencies as account managers. And it's possible that Lauren may be able to actually present to the TAC on that at a future road charge meeting. And then I'll send out a link to Asha's research, and I'll send out a link to the NPR story that Terry referenced. I will work with, and I think in terms of the participant categories, I think what I might do is I'll set up a meeting with, if you're interested, Dr. Agarwal, Lauren, and Lauren Kay and Lauren Verhoda, if they're both available, and Tam, and then we can all kind of try to work through that that issue. And when we're thinking through it, we'll take into account what Farah said about really wanting to look at it through the lens of income. So we'll work on that. And we will also work with Caltrans to think through some of the potential incentives that we could give to pilot participants, so that, like what Stacy was saying, we want to make sure that we are able to encourage low-income participants without penalizing them in any kind of monetary way or making it, not feasible for them to participate. So we'll think through that as well. And I will present these draft recommendations to the commissioners at the October meeting.
Let's add one thing for sure, maybe two. Could we update the website with the meeting schedule?
Yes.
And I also noticed there are a couple places on the website with membership lists that are out of date.
Okay, we try to stay on top of the membership, but we'll take another look at it. Thanks for pointing that out.
Okay. And we are supposed to adopt this as an action item, which seems a little redundant, but
No, there's no action required on this.
no action required on this. Good. Yeah. No need to go through the roll yet again.
Yeah.
Okay. Any members of the public would like to comment on agenda item 9, review of the action items? Then we will move to agenda item number 10, which is public comment for anything that was not already covered on the agenda today. Anyone interested in redressing their government for grievances at this time? Doug, I'm so disappointed that we have no people who would really like to take advantage of their First Amendment rights.
Mr. Chair, this is Lauren Perhoda. If no one else is interested in commenting, I would love
you
to
are
share.
The government. That doesn't really work.
I know, but if I could share a couple of informational items with the TAC, that would be delightful.
Wonderful.
Okay, just wanted to share with you all some interesting things that will be coming out this fall that may be of interest to you. First off, just last week, the state of Hawaii released their final report on their pilot. So that I think will be a very exciting read. The state of Minnesota also has a report out on their pilot, which each of these states have a slightly different approach that California has taken. So it's really interesting to look at the different nuances in different states. I really appreciated Asha's presentation today. She was kind of enough to give me a little sneak peek at her report, and I think it was a good basic study of that difference between rural and urban that really confirms the extensive research that's been done on this topic across states that show currently rural drivers are paying more to use the road, and a switch to a road charge could potentially be beneficial to them. You may recall that back in 2017, 2018, Ruckham West, which is a consortium of states that are studying road use charges, did a study on this that found that same thing. Ruck West has since changed its name to Ruck America. It is adding more states day by day that are interested in this topic. And they are almost done in updating that study. And I am hopeful that they'll be releasing it next week. So I will definitely provide that information to Hannah to share with you all. But I think that will be some very interesting additional information. It really breaks out the geographic definitions into 5 categories, really getting into the nuance, which I think is especially important in a complex state like California. It will also include very detailed kind of heat maps of the state, so you can really see the detail of where the tax burden is shifting in California, and you can look at other states as well. So I think that will be very interesting and useful to you all and to our elected officials in this state. We will hopefully have our final report from the 4-phase demonstration out very soon, and we will let you know when that's out. And then lastly, also this fall, UC Berkeley should be finalizing the study that they have done on the impacts to disadvantaged communities. The early stages of the study were guided by 2 former TAC members, Dr. Marty Wachs and Richard Mark Antonio, which both gave us really valuable comments as Berkeley was shaping the study. I just really appreciate the efforts of Dr. Susan Shaheen, who led this along with Jessica Lazarus in doing this effort. And I think it's going to be a real contribution to the discussion in our state. So those are some things coming down the pipeline. And again, I'll be sure to provide them to Hannah to share with you all when they are out. But just wanted to continue to share some of the work that's going on in California and around the country.
And I would encourage staff to take a look at those studies and work with Lauren to see whether it would be a good idea to put an agenda item on our next meeting to review those results and see if there are any any bit of helpful information or results that we can learn from all of those. And thank you, Lauren, for that. That wraps up the meeting for today. We will be meeting again on February 24th, 2023. We don't know exactly where yet, but we are going to figure that out and let you know. I would really appreciate all of you spending your time and contributing your knowledge and opinions and efforts on this. We all know how important it is. I wish the rest of the state would come in line with our sense of urgency, but it is encouraging to continue to learn and explore these issues and items with you, and to have such a great group here working on this. I think we're very fortunate to have your participation, and I truly appreciate it. So until February, we'll stand adjourned. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Commissioner Liu.
Thank you.